That's right. Well, first of all, I just want to say that I'm just going to kind of lead the discussion, and there's going to be lots of input from Scott because he knows these conditions. So I'm going to kind of direct it and add my comments, and then we'll ask Maureen the implications, because this is a very important part. Because what happens if we don't pay attention to the special conditions? If we don't encourage it, what happens? Jail. They breach and they go back to jail. So that's something we do not want. Okay, first of all, what are special conditions? How would you explain that? What do you think that is? Okay, well, no problem, I'll show you. Okay, there. Special conditions are conditions imposed by Correctional Service of Canada to address our CN's individual risk and needs. So that's put into place to keep the community safe and CNs. Special conditions necessary and proportionate to support the purpose of his or her conditional release, which is what it is. It's a conditional release while you're going through special conditions. Conditions that are necessary in order to protect our communities and to facilitate the successful reintegration of our CMs. Okay? Why should we know and understand our CM's special conditions? Why do you think we have to know that?
We can help them maintain it.
Right. We don't want them to breach their conditions. It's to live the way they're supposed to, and that there's never any jeopardy with it. So that we have to constantly do that. Is there anything you want to add, Scott, to that, or Maureen?
So I imagine you know that they always have to have their conditions on them.
Not all of the ones we have.
Yeah, they should always have it on them. So if they don't have it on them, they're breaching. It has to be on them.
So when you ask them, when you see them, they've got a little piece of paper. Has everybody, first of all, who's seen them from their CMs? Has everyone? Okay, has anyone not seen them from their CMs? Okay. So it's
That's for parole. I don't know
On
about probation.
probation, not all of the fellows do, because probation, on a provincial order, but on a federal order, they do.
okay. So, but everybody knows what to look for. It's squishy little nothing writing. But if they get stopped by the police, if they have to carry them, they must present them. So it's very, very important. Pardon? No? Okay.
Sorry, did you say when they're on parole and parole as well?
Yeah, while they're serving their conditional sentence, regardless of what it is, LTSO as well, they all have to have their conditions on. If they have contact with the police or authorities of any sort, they have to present that to the officer. And then they have to report to the parole officer, which has had contact with the police officer.
Okay, now there are what we have listed, and Scott was kind enough to give us the resources that we have to do. And some of them you'll be familiar with and some of them you won't, but these are the possibilities that they can have. So there's about 25, so we're going to have to go through them at a pace, but I'd like you to ask any questions, because with your CMs, if they have these conditions, you want to know how it can affect you and what you should be doing with them.
Anita, sorry.
Yes, sorry.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah.
The other thing I just want to press on is that a parole officer does not decide on the condition. They recommend conditions. So everything a parole officer does is they're called a case management member, and they take all the information and they filter it to the parole board. So my reports, the psychological reports, all the reports, all the history, they just filter it in and they present that to the parole board. And they base their risk factors or their conditions on the risk factors, and it's a recommendation to the parole board to enforce these rules upon that stat release, day parole, full parole, LTSO. Okay? LTOs are a little different because there's legal elements to it, and I can answer that if we get into that conversation after. But those conditions are imposed by the Parole Board of Canada. It is not parole officers that impose it. We just enforce it.
So as an example, Scott, what you spoke about is that somebody found that they wanted to have access to the internet.
That's
And they wanted to appeal that.
Yep.
That's what special conditions. They would go then they would appeal to the parole board.
They can appeal and challenge conditions at any time. And the parole officer would then put in a recommendation to either remove that condition or revise that condition. So for example, internet, we're going to be talking about it in a second, I'll use that example. If the guy needed to work in the community, needed the internet, there might be a stipulation added to a different condition that says with parole officer supervision. And so the officer can now make the call whether they, and then put something in place. Whereas there's some conditions that say absolutely no internet. So the person could, with the support of the parole officer, say, we support under these conditions that we are going to help this person for the reason of their job. And that would be the recommendation. And the Parole Board of Canada would look at that recommendation. It's called an assessment
for decision.
Thank you. Assessment for decision, and that assessment for decision is reviewed, and the parole board at that point makes their decision whether to support the parole officer's comments or stick with the original.
But can you just sort of explain the difference if they are court-ordered? If they're court-ordered conditions, like section 161, and that you'll be familiar with, then it's different. That isn't through the parole board. Can you just clarify that?
Yeah, so quickly, LTSOs, long-term supervision orders, and 161s and 810 orders are all through the legal system. So with LTSOs, we do recommend conditions. It goes through the parole board, but there's also legal elements to their conditions. If they breach, they go and they face the court.
Which is imposed by the judge.
Which is then imposed by the judges, and then they can revisit them through that system. And a 161 is imposed at the sentencing, and those conditions follow them for however long the 161 is designated for. An 810 order is a probation period that follows a federal sentence. So the person has completed their entire sentence, but we've been able to prove that without the support and further probation period, they are likely to, risk is undue, there's going to be somebody injured or something's going to happen. So we've proven that, and we prove it through court of law. So a judge has appealed and agreed with our recommendations. The police corrections work together to come up with that, with the Crown to impose that. And the judge will decide whether or not that happens. So if a person has an 810, it's solely through the courts.
And just a provincial person getting out with a probation order, how are those conditions imposed? By the judge at the time of sentence?
So probation is very different. It's 2 years less a day. Anyone in that range. And all of the conditions on a probation, so often you'll see a probation order is imposed instead of any type of sentencing, right?
Yeah.
So they go out in the community and they're supervised by a probation officer. And if they breach, they go up in front of the judge. And then the judge addresses the breach.
But the conditions are coming
From the judge.
That's right.
From the initial, yeah. And the probation would also recommend recommendations and stuff like that.
And it's better not to get too involved in that. It's good to have a general idea, because we are working with a lot of provincial now, so, you know, you can always check with me if you're wondering. But the guy knows whether he has to go to court or the parole board.
I think the thing to know is that because again, like you might have a CM that you're working with for 2 years and you got all of a sudden a new one and you don't know what it is. If you need clarification, you want to know the details and the implications of how that affects your CM, call Maureen and she can give you information, and she can contact with Scott if he needs more information, but we'll get that to you. Instead of getting into, you know, it's very, very detailed, so, and it's not pertinent to everybody. So just keep that in mind. That's a reference thing you could do when you get a new CM to know where that all sits, okay? So as an example, the first one, not to consume alcohol, and that basically means not to consume, purchase, or possess alcohol. That means that they can still be in the presence of somebody that's drinking?
Yes, so if there is somebody in that particular, if somebody is drinking around, that's fine. They can argue that, I guess they could go into a liquor store, but I would, if they were doing it frequently, if I was a parole officer, I would then probably add one of the next ones to it. But yeah,
Okay, so we'll go through because I realize we're already kind of halfway through this and we've got 25 of these, so we better get going. And just, you don't have to make notes because I've got a handout for all of you, so you don't have to worry about any of that, okay? Not to consume drugs, not to consume, purchase, possess drugs other than prescribed medication taken as prescribed and over-the-counter drugs taken as recommended by the manufacturer. Now, if you have problems with this, particularly with your CM, or you're wondering how this justifies, please bring this up, and then Scott can give us some insight into it, Maureen, and maybe the other group members too. You have to avoid, if they've got this condition, avoid certain persons, not to associate with any person you know or have reason to believe is involved in criminal activity. So that's no one from their past necessarily, and that it's getting involved, that's listed that way.
And that one is almost on every single
Okay. Next is avoid persons, sex trade, not to be in the company of sex trade workers. I even know that there was one CM that we heard about that had a relationship with someone and did not realize that she was a sex trade worker. This had never been disclosed to him. So always make your CMs aware of these kind of things because they may be getting into situations that they don't understand or they don't realize the implications of it. So it's very, very important for them to look into these things, okay? And you should clarify them for them and wonder and question about it. The other thing that we often do, and Maureen's been really good about it, is that we often get the parole officer to come in. If the gentlemen are willing to do that, they come and sit with us after we've worked with him or her for a couple of months or whatever else, and they come in and they give you a wealth of information. It's unbelievable. So keep that in mind always, and something that you might want to ask your CM, is it okay, would you give us permission for your parole officer to come in? And it's always to remember that we get information, we don't give information as far as it goes, so that their privacy and what happens in the circle is always maintained, but that we want to have some more insights and a better way to help them. Yes?
Just one comment on that. We can't have the parole officers for the provincial guys, and it's too bad. I'll just be honest, because it stays in this room. They have a much stronger union, and we have very few meetings in the daytime. If it was in the daytime, you go right to their office, whereas federally, parole, they'll almost always accommodate us, whether it be evening or any other time. But a lot of you working with provincial guys, and I have no choice, because they're bound by their unions, which are saying, these are our hours and this is our office.
Next, avoid persons. Now, victims. No direct or indirect contact within the victim or any member of the victim's family. We had one circle that the gentleman was not supposed to be in contact with any victims or his relatives at this point, and daughter specifically. And when they went to do a check on him, just a random check, they found that he had looked up a picture of his daughter that was taken 16 years ago, and he was pulled back. So just, they can't look on Facebook, they can't do any of those things, so just make sure that they're adhering to those guidelines and knowing it doesn't matter if it's a picture of 16 years ago and it's just a picture, not even contact. Just see how it might be interpreted. And again, any questions, call Maureen. That's the reality of it. She can solve those questions for us in Scott.
Just speak to the victims one for a second.
Yes.
Every action, activity, any movement that an offender has in the Lower Mainland, especially with sex offenders, they have victims on their victim lists. Victim services with corrections monitors this all the time. So if you ever wonder why a guy can't go to Vancouver because he hasn't had given enough notice to the parole officer to do up a travel permit, I don't know if you've heard this language before. The reason we need 5 days to do up a travel permit is because victim services is going to verify if the victims are okay with that person's travel. So just so you know, the offenders don't need to know that, okay? But that's what's going on in the background, just so you know that that's happening. Don't get into those legalities with your subjects, but that's what's happening with that. Okay? So there's a lot going behind the scenes.
So that, a perfect example is when sometimes we are trying to get CMs to come to the CoSA banquet, and it's outside their jurisdiction. So make sure that they're all that coverage and everything's there so that they're not disappointed and you're not disappointed in being able to, if you're taking them out for an outing, that they're not taking them out someplace they shouldn't be. Avoid persons, children, not to be in the presence of any, it'll tick off male, female, children under the age of specified, unless you are accompanied by a responsible adult who knows your criminal history and has previously been approved in writing by your parole supervisor. Do you want to address that, Scott? Is there anything in particular there that?
These conditions, all of them are very specific, and if any of those things are breached, they will be addressed. Whether they go back to jail or not, they'll definitely be something, it'll be considered a breach, and a new report will be written and sent to the parole board to update the file. Okay, so even if we decide to keep a guy, there was a guy that I think some of you might have been working with in Chilliwack, who was doing some behaviors and he got himself sent back. It was the third time he kind of repeated this same behavior. We still supported him to stay in the community because we felt he was manageable under different rules and ways that we would manage him, tightening the leash, so to speak. And we were keeping him in the community. We didn't send him back to jail. We did create, the parole officer created the report, shared our recommendation, and the parole board took one look at it and said, we do not. And they sent him back because he was an LP risk to society. So they will not always agree with us. And he is in jail and probably will never see the outside of jail again. He's a whole jail.
Yes.
Can you just speak to, like, our CM was, there's an issue, not an issue, but she said that her parole officer supports, not violating that, but it's okay. She trusts her judgment in that situation, that not to be near children. And so there was a little, we were feeling a little uncomfortable, like just to be on the safe side. Why wouldn't you practice this to the nines? And she kind of gave the impression that there was commiseration between her and her PO, that this was okay on some circumstances, and the PO trusted her judgment. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of that kind of dynamic.
I think your suspicion is very accurate. Being suspicious of what's being said there. You know, I don't know too many parole officers that would ever put themselves out on the line, especially with a condition like that.
Yeah, because we were saying,
So,
maybe you should get the PO to put that in writing or something.
So, no, it's a condition, it's a condition, it's a condition, it's a condition, and if it's breached.
Yeah. And I
so
think
you-
what happens is if you look throughout this whole document, the copy that you're going to get, it always says you've got special permission from in writing, always in writing. So get them to cover themselves. If they're not willing to put it in writing, they're not going to back you up if something happens.
If the parole officer did what she's suggesting, they get fired if they found out. This is a condition that the Parole Board of Canada has said has to be followed. Their job is to keep that person responsible and accountable for these conditions, and they're letting them breach it. They would be fired. That would be the end of their career.
Thank you.
Because it's giving her a false sense of confidence in her own judgment. The CM has developed a kind of confidence in her own judgment about what she can and cannot do with that, is what I'm kind of sensing.
Sounds concerning for sure.
So I think if it can't be put in writing,
And it's too bad, because in that case, we just had the parole officer come to a meeting, and at very last minute, I couldn't make it. And I regret that, so I think we'll do it again. There were several things we wanted to work through, and at very last minute, I couldn't make it. Only 2 of the 4 volunteers could make it. One of them is here today, but both were new volunteers, so you know, some of the questions weren't being asked that should have been. So we'll try to look at it again.
thank you. Next, avoid drinking establishments, not to enter establishments where the primary source of income is derived from the sale or consumption of alcohol. That's pretty clear, not going in any liquor stores, any beer parlors, anything like that, lounges, I guess, everything.
But you skipped the one before that.
Oh, did I? Oh, sorry. Okay, not to be near children's areas, not to be in, near, around places where children under the age of specified are likely to congregate, such as elementary and secondary schools, parks, swimming pools, recreational centers, unless accompanied by an adult previously approved in writing by parole supervisor. We've always asked for permission when we've taken our guy to McDonald's or something where you can expect kids to be, or a movie theater when we've taken them to the movie theaters. There's always permission added for something like that. We are recognized, and we have a letter in our groups that basically from the parole officer, he's allowed to go to places like this accompanied by the CoSA circle. So,
all the volunteers are automatically allowed?
no, not automatically.
You have to get a letter. No, you have to get special permission, but I think what's important to remember here, okay, is places like McDonald's where there's a play area, if they are sitting next to the play area and a spotter sees them, they're going to be going back regardless. So they need to be attentive to that, and they know those things. The problem can be when the volunteers aren't thinking, and that has happened once or twice. And the core members had to say, hey, but you know I can't do that. So that's why we're going over this, so we don't put them in a position. Some of them are developmentally delayed. We have guys who are very slow. So that's why we're looking at this. Just remember, a child sits down, you're on the Sky Train with them, you change seats. It's just, you know, basic common sense.
We went with one CM to the spaghetti factory, and family came in and he was facing them, and he just said, can I change seats with you? So that his back was to them. And I think those, you know, just pay attention, but like Maureen said, it's very important to be aware and remind them of those things. Avoid gambling establishments, not to enter any establishment where the primary source of income is derived from gambling. Not to gamble. Any comments on any of that? I think that's pretty straightforward. Okay. Motor vehicle restrictions. Motor vehicle restrictions. Not to own or operate a motor vehicle. Okay. No comments on any of that? Okay. Follow the treatment plan. Follow the treatment plan program arranged by your parole supervisor in the area of substance abuse, violence, family violence, sexual deviancy. They often are taking their programs. And do you want to just maybe address that, Scott, or just?
Officially, that's referring to program psychology and different things, and sometimes they'll pay for their own psychology outside of CSC, and we'll support that as long as there's communication between the psychologist and the parole officer. And if it is part of their plan, they would utilize, if something was to change in their activities and say, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, you wouldn't be able to enforce it, but you could you just say, you know, we're part of that plan when you came out, and why all of a sudden are you wanting to end that? Because it speaks volumes to this condition.
Follow psychological counseling. Follow psychological counseling if it's to be arranged by your parole officer. Specific purpose must be at risk or mental health related in support of safe reintegration. They can't just add that just because they want to. It has to be justified. Follow psychiatric treatment. Follow psychiatric treatment to be arranged by your parole supervisor. Specific purpose must be mental or health related again. We've had people that, you know, they have to regularly see their psychiatrists, and it's just all part of it. And if there's any problem, we encourage him to get to his doctor right away. If there's any changes in his condition, or he's concerned about his medications, get in to see the psychiatrist, and we ask him the following week if he's arranged for that. Take medication as prescribed. Take prescribed medication as directed by a healthcare practitioner, which can be a nurse, a doctor, and this type of thing. Participate in a psych assessment. Participate in a psychological assessment, psychiatric assessment, and follow treatment recommendations, including any medication regime that is prescribed. Okay, straightforward. We're running out of time, so if there is something you want, we can talk about it, but you want to say, oh sure.
The only thing with the psych conditions, just so you're aware, there is so many limitations within our system right now. We are lacking psychologists, we're lacking, so you'll often see that we're really struggling to meet these conditions a lot of the time. We've got psych nurses working with them, and instead, you know, it's really challenging. And usually there's one psychiatrist that's like traveling around the Lower Mainland, and we've got, you know, payment issues sometimes with them, and it's a bit of a disaster. So if you're hearing things, that's why, if you're hearing that they're not getting their needs met, they might not be. Just try to help them solve those problems.
Thank you. Report relationships. Immediately report all intimate sexual relationships and friendships with females, males to your parole supervisor. Immediately report any attempts to initiate intimate sexual and non-sexual friendships with females, males to your parole officer. Immediately report all intimate sexual and non-sexual relationships and friendships with females, males that have parental responsibility for children under the age of whatever to your parole supervisor. Not to reside with another person in an intimate relationship without the knowledge of your parole supervisor. Immediately report all contacts with females, males in whom you can associate or attempt to associate to your parole supervisor. Some of them have like no way. If you see somebody, you do, but if you're going to book a coffee with them the next time, you got to report that. It's really, it can be minor to very, very detailed. So just pay close attention to that. Any comments? No? Okay, you want to wait? Financial disclosures. This provide documented financial information to the satisfaction of your parole supervisor as per a schedule to be determined by your parole supervisor. Provide documented income information, expense information, debt information, banking information, financial transactions information to the satisfaction of your parole supervisor on a weekly, every 2 weeks, monthly schedule to be determined by your parole officer. Not to possess any banking documents, including credit cards, debit cards, bank cards, checks without prior written permission of your parole supervisor. Not to be self-employed or owned, or operate a business. Not to be in a position of responsibility, paid or unpaid, for the management of finances or investments in any other individual, charity, business, or institution. Just encourage your CNs to keep good records of everything, that if he's asked for anything, like we help out, a lot of you have helped out your CNs submit their income tax returns. Just encourage them and keep things on board if you see that they don't have great organizational skills, so help them in that way. Seek or remain employed. Remain gainfully employed or continue to actively search for employment or pursue academic upgrading. Submit proof of these activities to your parole supervisor. Pornography restrictions. Not to purchase, acquire, possess, or access pornography or sexually explicit material in any form or type of media. One thing I found interesting, that it didn't say that you produce, that you can actually be involved in the production of it. It doesn't cover it. I'm thinking, wow, Do you have any comments about this? Is that the pornography restrictions, it means like on the computer, I guess it goes through all this.
Basically anything related to pornography, that's the restrictions. You're right.
We have guys who can go on pornography, but not child pornography. Some of our guys are allowed to go on.
Probably the parole officers. I wouldn't, that's a loose one.
It is, but what I'm thinking of, the two cases I'm thinking of are both offenders against women, right? And they've never had a history of pornography, nor rape.
I'm just about finished through this, one more slide with it, and then we can answer a few questions if there is. Scott, if you can do that. Computer, internet restrictions, not to own, use of, or possess a computer as defined in that criminal code, or any technical device, like iPads, anything else, that would allow you to allow you unsupervised access to the internet. This is also if they're applying for a job. They can't work at Home Depot if they don't have insight, because if somebody has to go reference stock or anything like this, they have a problem. So it limits their opportunities for work. So always be aware of what the restrictions are to ensure that they're not breaching them. Even if they don't have, it's not in their job description, if there is access to that, get it clarified. Telecommunication restrictions. Refrain from possessing or using wireless telecommunication devices, not to own or possess more than one mobile communication device, and provide your parole supervisor with the billing statements for this device. Phew, okay. Respect curfew. Respect your curfew from this time to this time except for work-related reason and with your parole supervisor's written agreement. Provide urinalysis, provincial cases only. Submit to urinalysis on demand at regular intervals or where the parole supervisor has reasonable grounds to suspect that the conditions do not consume alcohol, that the conditions not to consume alcohol, drugs has been breached. reside at a specific place, residency, full parole, SR residency, LTSO residency, reside at a community correctional center or community residential facility or other residential facility such as a private home placement approved by the Correctional Services of Canada. So that's kind of that's a speed program through some of the conditions. And it's just to kind of introduce, we've never really talked about the conditions in that sense, so it gives you a bit of information. On the handout, I see that I didn't include, but it wasn't on this handout that I'm sending you today, but we will include it, Linnea will send it. It has the definitions, if you're sick, taken by, as prescribed, direct contact or indirect contact. So you reference this, keep this as a very handy handout. Yes, Claudia?
Just a quick question. They had to report any relationship. So how does that entail when we do things with them during the week that's not the CoSA circle? Like, we're going to the movies later tonight, so now I got scared. Because you said, I'm thinking, what if in the movie theater there are children? Does the field know that who we are? And stuff like that.
I would just make sure that they've communicated that kind of outing with the parole officer, and it's been authorized. Maybe if you're not trusting that the information they're giving you, then I would ask it for, to get them in writing from their parole officer. But if you feel that you can trust that they've asked the question, then that should be okay. And just be aware of time of day. Like if you're going to a matinee and there's lots of children there, that's not a good idea. So it's, just in movie, type of movie you're going to, those types of things are going to play a role. To answer that question.
And just one thing, in that case, the parole officer knows about CoSA, knows about our volunteers, knows that part of our program is one-on-one. So I think in those cases there's no problem. If you wanted to go somewhere that she couldn't go, yes, we'd have to have a letter and permission.
We've had some situations where we've gone to, we're taking to bridge lessons and whatever else, and of course it's a community center, so we got special permission. But actually for the last CM that we've had is we've got kind of, if you're accompanied by a CoSA member, it's okay. So I think once you've established that connection with the parole officer, and they feel that you know the limitations and you're not going to put them at risk or anything, they kind of give that to you. But then that's the responsibility on us then, to really make sure we know, so we're not jeopardizing. It would be terrible if we, jeopardize their release because of something that we weren't paying attention to. So please do that. I know it's very quick and added, and if there's questions that follow up from this, just submit them down there and we will deal with them. We just want to make sure that there's so many, like I said, there's 25 minutes, there's a lot more than that still too, but these are kind of some examples of them. So I hope this gives some clarity to what conditions are and the implications on our groups and our circles. So thank you very much. Just Maureen and Scott will have one quick word to close off, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita. One of the things I wanted to mention was going back to our dinner and our banquet. That is where so many of the parole officers have come. Last year, there were 3 high-risk police there from Vancouver. Now, Abbotsford is a whole different situation than Vancouver, even with these conditions. When I see guys getting breached in Vancouver, often they wouldn't get breached in the Valley, and I'm saying that honestly. But partly it's because of their past. The guys going downtown Vancouver are not accepted in the Valley. They have a rap sheet that's a lot longer, right? So this is why it's so important we look at these conditions, that we have that relationship with police, that we have that relationship with parole and probation. It's not because we want to pay $60 a ticket. It's because this is helping the guys. This is helping them to know what we are and that we can be trusted. And many times I do get a call, hey, do you know why they were there or what happened here? So thank you, Anita.
There were just 2 things that I wrote down some notes here. Report all relationships. Sometimes the parole officers get this one wrong. They promise the offender, The first time you meet somebody, you're allowed to go for coffee with them. The second time you go for a coffee, the third time you really gotta tell me that you've met this person and you're talking with them. I'm trying to work with the parole officers in my community to say, no, what is the intention? Focus on the intention. Is the person meeting them online and just going out with them because they want to be friends? Is it just a one-off thing? Do they want to have a romantic relationship with this person? The intention is where we should focus. If my intention is to have some ongoing relationship with it, that person should be reporting to the parole officer immediately. Simple as that. What is your intention? Okay? And that would be my suggestion to all of you, just use that same language I just shared with you. Puts the onus back on them. The traveling victim services, the victim areas, locations of where they hang out, if they're going into areas where children are restrictions are in place. Some of our guys will have a bracelet on their ankle. I don't know if any of you have seen that. That will automatically start beeping, and they have to call the National Monitoring Center when that happens, because they've gone out of their zone. So if you're driving in a car with a guy, and you happen to drive right by a school, for example, it might go off. If that goes off, they're going to have to call the National Monitoring Center, and they have a certain amount of time that they have to do that. It's not an onus on you. You didn't make a mistake. It just happened to go off. But you're there to also offer that support. He's on the phone with National Monitoring Center with a CoSA member who just happened to drive by, and I just want you to be aware that that might happen. And it's something that is a good tool as well. So if it goes off, you know that something's not right. Okay? And sometimes when the battery's dying, it'll start beeping too.
Or in bad weather, like the other night, right?
Yeah.
During our meeting, he has to spend 10 minutes trying to say, no, I'm not at that school, I'm here at Rosary Hall, I'm in a circle meeting. So apparently, it seems like when the weather gets worse, it becomes more.
So anyways, I just want to, just a moment, Deb. I just want to thank Scott and Maureen for just giving us some guidance in here and making this presentation much easier. And I